Welcome to you all to the first Expeditions Book Club. We're very thrilled to have as our first guest the most brilliant of writers, Adam Phillips, who blends a very deep knowledge of psychoanalysis, its history, practice, and its practitioners, with a knowledge of philosophy and literature, and dare I say, of life. Adam has written some 30 books now, I think it's almost that, and most of them are made up of essays. They're some of the most wonderful essays I've certainly ever read. They're epigrammatic, enlivening, and they use and tease out a genre developed or invented perhaps by Montaigne and made a little more comical by Charles Lamb. Just a smattering of his titles will tease you, I think, on kissing, tickling, and being bored, terrors and experts, Darwin's worms, unforbidden pleasures, the cure for psychoanalysis. We might do a little of that today. And the book under consideration today, The Life You Want. Although I'm not sure if the emphasis is the life you want or the life you want. Adam has also written books, his very first actually, on D.W. Winnicott, a pioneer of a very British brand of psychoanalysis, child psychoanalysis, which was Adam's first field as well, and another, a biography, or perhaps we should call it an anti-biography, in the very style of its subject, on the young Sigmund Freud. The book under consideration for our ex-book club, The Life You Want, begins by positing an argument, or perhaps just a difference, between the life we integrate within the Freudian model, that is a life shaped by instincts and our childhood within a family, and the postmodern philosopher Richard Rorty's life idea, which is a positing of the many lives we can invent, experiment with as we move through time. Perhaps that's a neoliberal paradigm. So Adam, my first question to you is really, why did you want to write this book? What is it that led you to it?
It's very, as you know, very hard to know why one writes the book one writes. And it is as though, in a sense, books sort of turn up. I don't want to be ingenuous about this, but it feels a bit like that. In retrospect, I think that I've always loved and liked psychoanalysis and been really interested in it, but I've also been oppressed by its essentialism, by the sense in which it's, as it were, all about the unconscious, but analysts seem to know what's in the unconscious and how it works. So anybody who's interested in this knows these basic paradoxes. And so reading William James originally, and then reading Richard Rorty was really exhilarating and a breath of fresh air, because by being anti-essentialist, they start from the position that we don't know who we are. And the question is, who do we want to make ourselves into? Now, it's wildly voluntaristic, this, and it's wildly optimistic and wildly American capitalist, but it is also rather exhilarating and freeing. So it's what the book, I think, is suggesting, as far as I can tell, is not we choose one or the other, but put them together and you get something very interesting. Because Freud is very explicit and clear about how determined our lives are by the past, and also by our instinctual life and by our traumatic experiences. And he has a very, in a way, tragic European sort of modernist sense of the real limits of what people are capable of, and also the real limits of human goodness, apart from anything else. And of course, after 2 world wars, you indeed might rather lose confidence in the goodness of human beings. And then Rorty comes along, building really on William James's work, and is incredibly, fantastically optimistic, in what his critics would say, an American way. Anything is possible, you never know what's possible, and as he keeps saying in various books, the only question is, what do we want to make of ourselves? Not who are we, but what do we want to make of ourselves? Well, the combination of these two fictions really interests me.
And how do you navigate between those two fictions? And can I just add to that?
Let's do.
Freud also has a sense of humor, I think a very deep sense of humor. I'm not altogether sure, and it may just be that I haven't read enough of Richard Rorty, that Rorty does, despite his desire for inventiveness.
Well, you're right. I mean, Rorty has a blitheness and a kind of extravagance, but he also is earnest. There is an earnestness about him. He's not humorless, but there's an earnestness about him. And of course, Freud is really explicitly into and interested in pleasure. He's not himself a great hedonist, but he's very funny, and he is telling us that sex is really, really interesting, even though he also tells us we have no idea what it is. And these are the kind of wonderful combinations that we read Freud for. He's not dogmatic and a maniac. He's extremely open-minded and willing to entertain possibilities. But of course, if you want to read the disinhibited Freud, you have to read Ferenczi, who is Freud's disinhibited future, so to speak. I think that Rorty, for me, has a kind of open-endedness. And there's something very dispiriting about the idea that basically, fundamentally, we're determined by our histories. And in a way, what Rorty is suggesting is that this could be a form of bad faith, that we delegate our agency and our intelligence to the past, to childhood traumas, to instincts, as if to say, it's not me, it's my childhood. Well, Rorty doesn't really take this on at all. Rorty says, what do you want to do and be? Well, try and be it.
Yes, I mean, the inventiveness is very charming, really.
It is, yeah.
But could I ask you a question about Freud, although...
Do.
And I think you do sort of deal with it in the book, but I'm not sure that you do. It's to do with the fact that I don't think all of Freud is quite the Freud that is so intent on our being completely shaped by childhood forces, or indeed completely shaped by what he then eventually, and it takes quite a long time, decides are two instinctual forces.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that the second of those, the death drive, is after all just a drive. I mean, it's that you feel impelled for whatever reasons, but you feel impelled, and that's impelled to repeat, impelled to die, impelled to be despairing, whatever. But it's the impelling that's important.
Yeah.
So is Freud quite so imprisoning throughout his life?
Yes, I mean, I don't think so. I mean, I find Freud the opposite in many ways of imprisoning. Also, as you said, there isn't Freud. Freud is amazingly generative and goes on changing his mind, which is very clear if you read him closely. He's also very hospitable to be read. In other words, it's not some esoteric cult, this. Freud is really saying, here's what I think, and because it's accessible, we can then decide what we think about what he thinks. We can actually argue about it. This seems to me in itself a liberation. I also think that Freud is genuinely interested in other people in a very remarkable and sort of extraordinary way, because just simply the idea that you would invent a therapy based on listening to what somebody else says is extraordinary. It really is extraordinary. And it's equally extraordinary in a different way to suggest that people tell a better history of their lives by saying whatever comes into their minds. I mean, this is amazing. And it's very, very interesting. So I think in all those ways, for me, Freud is very, very compelling. Also, he's on the one hand clearly a determinist because he's a Darwinian. So you have to be a determinist in a way. But nevertheless, if Freud was an absolute determinist, he wouldn't have promoted psychoanalysis as a therapy. Because what would you be doing? Simply reconciling people to the hopelessness of their fate. Well, Freud is really not like that. Freud really thinks there's the possibility of not exactly liberating people, but certainly freeing them to some extent to make choices about their desire and their appetite, and also to go on revising their history. This is amazing. Freud doesn't believe you've got a history, you just have got to remember it. He says you go on actually making up the past. That's how you make a future.
So is Rorty, in a sense, a cure, a kind of cure, a possible way forward for analysts who actually do perhaps concentrate too much
Yes.
on the past.
That's exactly what I think. Rorty is a cure for the extreme determinists and the extreme essentialists, and is effectively saying this is simply ideological brainwashing. This is people turning up and telling us who we are. And that's why one of the things I say in the book, I think, is that all these accounts of cures are actually prescriptions masquerading as descriptions. So all these very interesting theorists are saying, they look like they're saying, look, this is what life's like. This is how it works. Actually, they're saying, this is what I want life to be like. Because, as Freud has shown us, everything's wishful. Everything's permeated by wishing. Even a theory that is actually critical of wishing is wishful. And this is wonderful and funny and interesting. So I think that, in a way, they're each an antidote for each other. Freud says to Rorty, he doesn't say anything to Rorty, but Freud says to Rorty, actually, wanting and making something of yourself is much more difficult than you think. You're underestimating what we're up against. Rorty says to Freud, you'll just pretend to be omniscient. You don't know what reality is or people are. You're just making it up. Well, let's make it up differently.
This is what I love about your books, because even when you're arguing within your argument with somebody else, I'm also arguing with you. And it's the way you write that makes one do this. You have an essay in this volume called Psychoanalysis for Beginners. I'm an expert on beginners. And I think it's a very interesting piece because, of course, you make us see that Freud never had analysis. And what does that mean to actually have everyone since then have to have had an analysis in perhaps a Freudian or any other way? So what does it mean? Where are we with the psychoanalysis for beginners? Are you saying that we should analyze ourselves? Well, we can't very easily
I'm not.
do that.
I think the main point, insofar as I can be the authority on my own work, which obviously I'm not, is that...
We like to think you are.
Well, thank you. Is that all of us who are interested in psychoanalysis came across it once. We found it. We read something, we heard somebody talking, who knows, but one way or another, we came across it. So it's a before and after story. So we discover it, and those of us, there are some of us who are gripped by it, who really felt this was really relevant. We may not have known what it was relevant to, but it really gripped our imagination. And that's the first bit of what I'm interested in, is the fact that it grabbed some people's imaginations. I've never thought everybody should be interested in it, or that everybody who wasn't interested was resisting it at all. It depends whether it's your cup of tea, whether it appeals to you. So there's that. Then the question is, once you've discovered it, what do you make of it? And of course, in one sense, there are people you can ask this to. People who are qualified psychoanalysts, some of whom will be very quick to tell you what it is and what it isn't. The version of psychoanalysis that I'm interested in is partly that one, but also one that says we couldn't possibly know what it is, but we can go on talking about what it might be. So for me, the motto here is when Ferenczi said, the patient isn't cured by free association, he's cured when he can free associate. This is a startling thing to say, because if we have to wonder then, if we lived in a world of free associators, what would it be like? What's the morality of a free associator, etc., etc. So Freud really, to my mind, opened something up. And I think what happened was he realized this as he went on making it up, and then he panicked, as indeed well one might, and then started closing it down a bit. And psychoanalysts after Freud have done a bit of closing down, a bit of opening up. But I think everybody who reads this or is interested knows this is really fantastically inflammatory and provocative and open-ended and unclear, actually, what it is. So this, to me, is part of the romance of it, the interest of it, is that. I think the fact that Freud was not analysed is both charming and enigmatic, because clearly Freud didn't didn't want anybody to analyze him because it was none of their business. And he wanted to be the person who was, as it were, the master of it in some sense. I think it's a very good idea that analysts are analysed, because the way you learn to do it, in my experience, is through your own analysis and through individual supervision. Anybody can read the books and you can talk about it with people, but that's the way to do it. It's like an apprenticeship. You learn to do it by doing it and by being psychoanalyzed. The consequence of this is you learn an awful lot from your own analyst, and you identify greatly with your own analyst, and that cuts both ways. You know, it can be wonderful, it can be tricky. Psychoanalysis, for me, dismantles the idea of discipleship and of gurus and of authorities. In fact, what it says is, instead of authorities, we need conversations. And I like that.
Sounds great to me. We're having one now.
True.
So I want to just push that a little bit further, because one of the things that people talk about a great deal is whether psychoanalysis has any social or perhaps even political impetus or side or use. And I wonder where you are with that. Because, you know, is free association something one can do in public? Is the unconscious useful in the public sphere?
Yes, is it a group activity? This has always been tricky for me, because it seems to me when analysts, this is a hopeless generalization, when analysts talk about politics, or when people use psychoanalysis to talk about politics, it always seems to me strangely irrelevant and very grandiose. Now, there's no reason why that should be true, but it seems often to be true. Because when people learn psychoanalysis, they also learn a strange kind of omniscience. And people talk with immense authority about enormous things. And so I can understand psychoanalysis as a clinical practice with individuals, possibly with groups. And this is my limitation, am baffled when it comes to the question of translating it into political life, even though all life is political life. If you see what I mean, there's only group life, really. But I was, as I imagine you probably were, originally very interested in Adorno, Horkheimer, Marcuse, all those people who tried to put Marxism and psychoanalysis together and psychoanalysis and politics together. But it never, it's not that it didn't work, but it seems to be it died very quickly as a viable thing. So I think it is, as it were, a task for the future for somebody to interest journalists and politicians in psychoanalysis, because otherwise analysts are just going to be sort of shouting from the universities and no one will bat an eyelid.
Well, let me try and push you a little bit in a different direction, because I've heard you say that the unpredictability that arises within free association, and indeed free association itself, is in times of increasing censorship, is in fact something that might provide a space where one can be socially more radical than anywhere else. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, there's a very interesting thing that Ferenczi says in a letter to Freud, where he says, why is it that anybody can't say anything to anybody? Why can people only speak freely to analysts? And this is, of course, a very interesting question, to which there are many answers, but still an interesting question, which is, why are we so inhibited with each other? And what do we fear is going to happen if we aren't? And I think that's still a very kind of alive question, in the sense that what kind of collective project could psychoanalysis endorse? Because you could think, I do think sometimes, that people come to analysis to enable them to talk and listen, which would seem to be the ingredients of democracy. People need help to talk and listen, and they need to know what it is that baffles or interrupts their listening, and indeed their talking. So if we were to speak ideologically, you could say something like, the best training ground for a democrat is psychoanalysis. because they may really be able to learn where they refuse to listen and why, and what they do instead of listening, and what they do instead of talking. That's very illuminating. And again, here we're stuck with something, which is that, as you know, originally, some of the original analysts ran free clinics. Anybody could turn up. When I worked in the health and child guidance clinics, anybody could turn up. But psychoanalysis has remained very, very financially elitist. And that's a big problem. So the first stage, I think, for psychoanalysis making political contributions is opening it up. It's making it available to all sorts of people. Because certainly one of the things I found out, because when I trained, there was a kind of implication that really we were kind of all in Vienna at the turn of the century, and we were all kind of affluent and rich and probably Jewish. And of course, we aren't all that. And what I found working in child guidance clinics in South London, various other places, that all sorts of people can use it. All sorts of classes, genders, so-called races, etc. It is amazingly shareable.
But that has become increasingly the case.
Yes, I think
even
that
though
is.
it may not
Yeah.
be, the old
Yeah.
1950s
Yeah.
American version
Yeah.
of psychoanalysis as a 5-6 day a week practice. Do you think that this rollout of psychotherapeutic ideas as well as understandings is helping us in the general social sphere, or is it inducing more mental problems? I mean, not mental problems,
Yeah.
but something that's diagnosed or categorized as a mental
It's
problem.
very hard to know this, isn't it? Because of psychobabble. Because we know that psychoanalysis and psychotherapy language is easily accessible and adoptable. And it then becomes another way of not thinking. But I think what you learn in the process of analysis, if it's good, is the way in which you take refuge in jargon or cliches. And this is what Lacan clearly means by full speech and empty speech. Some talking is suffused with feeling and thought, and some talk isn't. And those are useful distinctions, I think, to make, that in a sense people have to learn to talk. And it's not actually fantastically easy, because one of the reasons is because language is very useful as a defensive armor, as we all know. It cuts both ways, this. But I do think that within that context, everybody knows that if you talk about things, it makes them realer. And which is one of the reasons people don't want to go for analysis. But it also is a problem in terms of diagnostic categories, because the more people talk about them, the realer they seem to be. And, we know why people want diagnoses, partly because, this is niche capitalism. You isolate a description of a condition or a syndrome, and then you proffer a treatment for it. Doesn't mean these descriptions aren't useful or good, but they can be exploited in terrible ways. And, I think it's always worth having in the background the line from Endgame, "We're on Earth, there's no cure for that."
Which sounds as if it came straight out of Freud.
Yeah.
Thank you, Beckett. So will you read a little bit of this
Sure.
scintillating book for us? And a passage which doesn't sound like free association, but maybe it has a bit of that in it.
Yes, it does.
Where was it? Page 49. I'm sorry.
Yes, I can see it. It's there.
You can see it.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Okay. Even though Freud never said this, I think we should think of psychoanalysis as, among many other things, the science and art of unpredictable side effects. That is, it's a treatment that provides the setting for side effects that cannot, and therefore must not, be predicted. That's what it is for there to be what Ferenczi calls a dialogue of unconsciouses. So in the finding and founding of psychoanalysis, Freud creates a threshold from science to literature, and from traditional medicine to something else. And we, following on, cross the threshold from psychoanalysis as a cure to psychoanalysis as the setting for unpredicted and unpredictable side effects. As a paradoxical treatment that, in aiming to heal or cure or diminish suffering, also aims to have unpredictable consequences that by definition cannot be described or accounted for before they happen, and in one sense can't, by definition, be aimed for. that the psychoanalyst and her patient are also, unlike conventional medical doctors, unconscious of what they want from each other and what they can do together. That the analyst and her patient have a shared task that they're conscious of and can apply themselves to, and they also have, unavoidably, an unknowable array of unknown and partly unknowable effects on each other. The unpredictable being by definition always for beginners, but only unpredictable because of the swathe of things we believe we can predict. The psychoanalyst is always on the threshold between knowing what she wants for the patient and being unconscious of what she wants. By the same token, from a psychoanalytic point of view, the psychoanalytic patient is always on the threshold between knowing what she wants from the analyst and not knowing. And we may say in the light of this that psychoanalysis could help people to enjoy thresholds and consider them as opportunities and possibilities. And to enjoy thresholds, you have to enjoy bearing contradictions rather than trying to resolve them.
Thank you, Adam.
Pleasure. Thank you very much.
And now we must go away and bear our contradictions.
Yes, we must.
Which is, after all, the story of life, isn't it?
It is the story
and it is
of life.
the life we want. It's
It is
full
the
of
life we want.
contradictions. Thank you so much, Adam, for that. I'd actually like to ask you to read more, but perhaps there's no time. But thank you, and thank you to all of you for being with us here.